to another episode of Lift, Lighten, and Lead with Legacy Contracts. Whether this is your first time listening or you're returning for more, we're very glad you're here. This podcast is for attorneys who want more than efficiency. You want clarity about how your firm actually operates, how decisions are made, and where strain quietly forms beneath the surface. Today's episode is part of The Hidden File, a space where we examine things that shape law firms long before they become visible. The overlooked systems, the unspoken assumptions, the decisions that quietly determine whether a firm feels stable or strained. Our intention here isn't to add to the noise or give you quick fixes. It's to name what's been operating unseen so you can lead with more calm, confidence, and clarity. So let's open the file. So each month thus far for this year, we've paused to look beyond the immediate demands of legal work within law firms and examine the operational patterns that are quietly influencing leadership capacity, team performance, and stability. Today's topic will be about June's conversation, which we focused primarily on a pretty simple idea. It's in regards to the most expensive problems inside of a law firm are rarely the loudest ones. They're usually pretty quiet. They're hidden underneath, the chaos and the noise of the everyday workload. And they're pretty much issues that appear manageable. They're challenges that only add like a few minutes per day, decisions that keep finding their way back to leadership, workflow interruptions that everyone's kind of just learned to live with, or even like communication gaps that aren't severe enough to create a complete crisis, but they happen frequently enough to quietly erode trust and efficiency within your firm. Because these challenges and these problems aren't as loud as, maybe client issues or billing concerns, most firms don't really notice these patterns immediately because everything else kind of continues to move forward. Your cases are happening, your clients are still being served. You have to handle, the things that your employees may be bringing up on a day-to-day basis, your revenue's increasing, whatever else have you. When you look at all of that on the outside, your firm appears pretty successful, but beneath the surface, leadership capacity literally continues to shrink. Your teams may be increasingly dependent on managing partners, delegation becomes frustrating, and your growth really feels heavier than it should. So for the month of June, within Legacy's ecosystem of our articles, our blog posts, our social media posts, YouTube, all of those things, we've explored these topics within 7 different examples. We looked at discussing why law firm problems so often become the managing partner's responsibility, that, a lot of people within those leadership roles tend to assume that this happens because either their team lacks initiative or they just haven't hired the right people, which is very present within, today's society of how many jobs are constantly being posted or reposted even after a couple of months. And in many firms that can be the case, but a lot of times the deeper issue is structural. When ownership of certain tasks is unclear, when authority is undefined, or just accountability exists only informally, a lot of decisions that revolve on your day-to-day tasks and just things that you need to get done naturally migrate upwards. So your leadership then becomes the operational safety net within your law firm. And it's not because, most of the time it's not because you have leaders who want to be micromanagers, but it tends to be because they are the operational safety net. They do not want to hold everything. Managing partners and law firm leaders have a lot on their plate already. So holding, the entirety of the law firm's operational system is not something that you would see them gravitate towards a lot, but it's mainly because the structure surrounding your work every day has not evolved alongside the law firm's growth. And so with this, we have talked about for this month some of the smaller signs that this could look like to show you that your firm structure may be straining a lot more than what you could be aware of. So this could be repeated questions from, your employees or your clients. It could be workflow delays, inconsistent client communications, increasing interruptions, or just, growing dependence on memory. I know that with a lot of positions that are being posted or available, and a topic of conversation that I've seen happen on social media is the fact that a lot of companies are not having or doing any kind of onboarding anymore. So a lot of these positions that are being hired for, the employees are having to not only establish and create their own workflows, but they're keeping it inside their memories so that when they're either, they either resign from the position, they're let go or whatever, that those memories leave with them. They're, nothing is documented. They don't have any processes for this. And that leaves the firm in the same, if not worse position than when they initially hired for that. Or could look like staff waiting for approval before moving any kind of work forward. So individually looking at all of these smaller signs, they can appear insignificant, but collectively on a day-to-day basis, or even just, if you look at it as a whole, they show you a different story. They often tell you and signal that your law firm systems, it's not necessarily supporting your firm and aligning with your growth, but it's hindering the individual growth as well, whether that's your clients, your employees, or even yourself. Everything is not on the same page and you're not moving towards the same destination that your revenue or even your firm is trying to move towards as well. And so the good news is that when these small signs are officially recognized and you have, your eyes on them, visibility on them, whatever else have you, that is still receiving information about your law firm. It's showing you where the gaps are, and it's showing you where you have expansion for growth in those areas. If you have questions that are coming back to you repeatedly, that is showing you that your intake process could be worked on. If you have issues with your billing, that allows you to look at the overall operational systems of how you're processing and sending out your bills, how you're following up with them, whatever else have you. If you have communication breakdowns, that's telling you that you need to kind of create a better system to have more follow-ups or more efficient follow-ups or even consistent follow-ups. So these recurring problems that are showing you that you have deeper structural gaps, but it's also showing you that even if you have a process that exists, it needs to be expanded to match where your law firm is and where you're trying to go. But with this, one thing to really keep in mind, and something that we've seen law firms tend to do, is that when they recognize that these smaller signs and things are happening on a day-to-day basis, most firms respond to these problems with additional effort. They tend to go, to the next extreme, where it's like, okay, we just need to send out more reminders, or we need to have more meetings, or we just need to have, more oversight. And while that may seem like a productive avenue to take, most sustainable improvement rarely comes from just pure effort alone. 9 times out of 10, it comes from establishing some kind of architecture or actual structure within the way that your firm is operating from the foundational level. So designing systems that support that consistency without requiring constant intervention may need to be something that you keep in the forefront of your mind instead of just trying to add to the current system that is in place. To support this idea and to support this theme, we released our ebook at the beginning of this quarter, and it's called Invisible Decisions, The Cost of Undefined Authority. And within this ebook, it explores one of the most common patterns that we have seen within law firms and that, we have mentioned here previously, which is the tendency for decisions to migrate back to leadership when ownership and authority both remain unclear. Both of those things, between the ownership of task, delegation, workflow, whatever else have you, and the authority over them, tend to lean back into those smaller signs that we were talking about earlier. Undefined ownership tends to create emotional drag. It slows workflows, it weakens accountability, but it also increases leadership dependency. You find people who, even though if they own lead intake, client billing, scheduling, depositions, client communications, if they do not have any kind of defined authority over that task and it's just been delegated to them, that then creates the same cycle that we have been mentioning here. And because most employees find themselves in that constant loop where they don't actually have defined authority over certain things, and they find themselves not really owning a certain task. It just kind of being, given to them as like a, here, you can borrow this for a little bit. That then quietly reduces the firm's capacity to grow. So if you've ever found yourself asking, why does everything keep coming back to me? Why are decisions taking so long to be made? Why does delegation keep failing? This resource was pretty much written for you, So the ebook is a pretty good resource. We have a resource library as well that has a lot of different things you can explore if you are interested in that. But this all goes back to the idea in the term of lessening the capacity that leadership currently has with having to make the decisions all the time, having to constantly redefine who has authority over what, designing these workflows or even just adding to them, and allowing leadership to actually have the capacity to continue to grow the firm in the way that they want to move towards. So with wrapping up our discussion on those topics for June, as we move into July, our focus would then shift to a newer conversation about resistance, and specifically about why law firms often resist the very structures that they already know they need within their firms. Because if we, take into account everything that we've seen here at Legacy, the things that we've been discussing, and, all of the topics of conversation that we've been having, most firms don't avoid structure because they don't understand its value, but they avoid it because the structure then changes things. It removes that ambiguity. It clarifies those, the ownership that you need, exposes gaps, and it requires decisions to be made. And sometimes, majority of the time, we have found that chaos tends to feel more comfortable because it's familiar. That known quote where it's like, I'd rather deal with the devil I know than the devil that I don't. And that's what that's kind of what we have found within a lot of law firms, is that chaos, in a good manner, brings about a lot of unknown and uncertainty. And a lot of firms would rather put out the fires on a day-to-day basis because they know what it requires of them, even if it's burning them out, rather than do the deep dive work to move their firm into an unknown place that they can then continue to grow and establish. So July's theme of resistance to structure really explores why operational change often feels difficult because of that chaos, and because firms tend to default to those old patterns, and then what it looks like to move forward to awareness and implementation. So wrapping everything up, June, we were looking at delegation, undefined ownership, authority, and leadership capacity, and making sure that we are answering those questions for managing partners and law firm owners as to why, things aren't moving forward the way that they would want, why they keep handling, day-to-day decisions, why they're making decisions for other people, why they're kind of going around the same circles and the same cycles and the same loops. July moves into why you may or may not be resisting actual structural change within your firm, and what that looks like with having the awareness of these constant cycles that are happening, and then taking that step to move towards that implementation. And so with that being said, that is it for today's conversation. If it resonated with you, you can explore this concept further in our articles, our blogs, our YouTube channel, our, ebooks, and any other thing that you can find in our resource library on our website. But here on this podcast, The Hidden File, it exists to really slow things down, to reflect, contextualize, and give language to what many firms feel, but they haven't been taught to name. So we hope today's insight helps you move forward with greater clarity and less internal strain. Law firms aren't built in moments of urgency, but they are built through consistent and intentional choices. This is Legacy Contracts, and until next time, keep leading with clarity.